Greetings and welcome to Let's Talk About Books, baby, where we talk with your favorite LGBTQ authors. This is Anita Kelly, and my guest today is author Kelly Wacker. Hi, Kelly.
Hello.
How are you?
I am very good.
Awesome. I love your name.
Oh, yeah.
You can't go wrong with Kelly.
Oh, that's good. I thought you meant my last name.
I love that too. That's unusual.
Well, I know if we're sharing the first last name thing. Oh, I guess I've probably grown up with people, manipulating my last name in various ways.
Yes, I'm sure. Oh, that's great. So how are you doing today?
I am good. It's I'm in Central Alabama, so I'm here in the Deep South, and it is I'm not sure whether to say we're like late spring or early summer, but the weather's beautiful right now, so it's really hard to not be good on a day when the sky is blue and things are growing, and it's good.
Yeah, nice. Ah, that's good to hear. I know. I'm with you on that one. So Kelly, let's talk about some books that you have out on the market, if you don't mind. You have 2 published novels with Bold Strokes Books.
Correct.
So the first one, I believe, is called Holding Their Place. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay, and that was published in 2018? That's
right.
Okay, and can you tell us a little bit about this?
Absolutely. Holding Their Place is a historic romance. It's a novella, so it's shorter than your average novel, and it is set during World War I in 1916, which is really the middle of the war, and things are very dire. It's set in France. The characters are British, so it's 2 women, Dr. Helen Connery, who is a surgeon, and Julia March, who is Julia March, who is an ambulance driver, and they are stationed at a field hospital that's close to one of the fronts. And so it's really a novel of awakening, of sexual awakening, but the 2 characters are also suffragettes. And one of the things about the time period is it's a moment in time when so many things are changing, especially for women. So it also speaks to that time as well.
Wow, that sounds great. I love historical romances. So did you have to do a lot of research for that? I'm thinking quite possibly you did.
Yeah. It was really a combination. So, one of the things is I'm an art historian, it's like I like to say, my day job is in academia, and I'm writing, fiction any other time that I can.
Sure.
So I'm an art historian. One of my areas of specialty is the art of the 20th century. And so I have a lot of familiarity with that time, from an art historical perspective. Oh, nice. So there are some things I know, but when you start writing a story, there are so many things that you don't know. For example, at some point, I wanted to have the characters sitting in a garden having a cup of tea, and I got to thinking, was a thermos even around in 1916? So
yeah.
Go off on these little rabbit hole adventures, and I discovered that yes, the thermos was around in 1916. So sometimes there's those little tiny tidbits that you have to research, and the story itself. One of the most enjoyable parts of the research for that story was that it was inspired by 2 real life women who were 2 doctors who ran hospitals, first in France. They were also British, first in France, and then in England, and their names are Flora Murray and Louisa Garrett Anderson. And they changed people's attitudes greatly about women and what women could do, during World War I. So I had discovered them, just in a roundabout way, and their story. And so reading about them and reading, histories about them really, kind of informed the tone of the story and the sense of the place, and the sense of the people as well. So there's lots of different ways of doing research, really.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting. And did you become aware of Flora and Louisa through your day job?
Actually, I was thinking about this and recently, and I don't remember how I first became aware of them. I think it was because about the time, writing Holding Their Place, I was writing it around, 2017 or so. And, the dates of World War I were 1914 to 1918. So that window, there were a lot of things happening, in various places, recognizing the war, because we're coming up on that or within that 100-year, anniversary.
Yeah.
And so I just sort of stumbled across this article. It was actually like a something from the BBC. It was like a little like radio essay or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it was about the hospital that they ran, and I was so fascinated by it. And so then that led me to learn more about them, and it just kind of folded its way into the story.
Oh, that's really cool. That's I that adds like a whole nother, I guess, level to it, that it is kind of based on some real women who were really doing that work.
Yeah, and I didn't necessarily base my two characters on those particular two women, but but those two women and other women that I learned about, they informed those characters. And and the one thing I don't think I mentioned too is this hospital that they ran was an all-woman hospital, from doctors to administrators to orderlies, and they were suffragettes, and so it was amazing. And one of their motto was "Deeds, not words," and so one of the things that they did what they did in a lot of ways because it was important, to their society, but they also did it to demonstrate how capable women were, and it changed attitudes. Women got the right to vote in Britain, shortly after the end of the war. So I think, there's always these truths in fiction, and that's something that I really love about fiction.
Yeah, that's so great. Yeah, I'm going to have to check that out. Thanks for letting us know about that.
Oh, you're so.
And that's still available through Bold Strokes Books, right?
It is. It is available because it's a novella. It's available in the ebook format only. So it is always available.
Okay. Alrighty. And then you had a second book come out the following year in 2019 called Aspen in Moonlight.
Correct.
Which is a totally different genre, I believe.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about that?
Sure. The setting is contemporary. It's paranormal romance. It's set in Colorado, which is my home state, and so a place that I know well. And the characters are Sula Johansson, and she is the director of a bear conservancy. She's trying to live very quietly, kind of under the radar. She has a big secret to keep, and she's a berserker, so she's a bear shifter. And Melissa Warren is an art historian who's originally from Colorado, but currently living in the South. Sounds a little bit like me.
I'll say.
She travels to Colorado to find out more about some paintings that she's inherited from her grandmother. And so the two kind of, meet in this place. There's romance. There's also a troublesome mountain lion. There is a trapper who's trying to get the mountain lion and doing some illegal, on top of unethical things. So there's lots of conflict, and it brings so much together. So I hope that's a good introduction to the story.
Yeah, it really it sounds very adventurous, actually.
Yeah, there is some adventure to it. One of the things about it is, because it's designated as a paranormal romance, and it has a shifter character to it, and there's in that particular genre, there's a lot of expectations for a story like that, and my story is a little different, and that's something that some readers have commented on, that it wasn't necessarily what they expected, and sometimes that was great for some readers, and other readers were maybe not so good. But I have had a lot of readers say that they really enjoyed the story. Some people said, I don't know if that's the kind of story I would read, but they loved it. They liked the setting. I always like to say, if you like romance, you like mountains, you like animals, you like a little adventure, a little culture in the mix, then you're probably going to like the story.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Yeah, I often find myself thinking that, like, because I'm doing this podcast, I try to read, pretty much everything that comes my way, and I end up enjoying things that I never thought I would.
Yeah, it's so easy to just read the things or the things you like. And, I really appreciate it when, somebody makes a recommendation like, hey, I think this is a story or a book or whatever, that I think you'll like, especially when it's something that I might not normally pick up, because then, it's always rewarding, to find something new or something different.
Yeah, it really is. It's like when you were a kid and, you were forced to try some new foods and surprisingly you like them.
That's true. And sometimes you grow into it,
Yeah.
I think about so many things I didn't like, at one point in my life that later on I ended up liking. So it's good to stay open to those things.
Oh, definitely. Yep. Definitely. It's great to stay open to anything, right?
Yeah.
All kinds of new adventures in life. So what I'm hearing is that Aspen and Moonlight could be semi-autobiographical. Is that right? Or no?
Not really. Well, I mean,
You're not a shifter.
Yeah, I'm not. I secretly, I wish I was. Well, maybe not so secretly. I think anybody who knows me. I love animals. I love bears. I had a friend a long time ago who used to call me Gentle Ben. And so that's something that's, just kind of, been there. I'm an art historian, right? I'm originally, from Colorado. And I live in the South now. So there's all these little pieces. I have a painting, by my grandmother, or not by my grandmother, that I inherited from my grandmother, that was by a local painter who's just, kind of an almost all but sort of unknown, landscape painter from the area. So there's all these little, bits and pieces that, like I said, there's always truths in the fiction,
Yeah.
So there's all these little pieces that inform it, but the story itself, is sort of it's its own world, or its own place.
So did you have to do any research for that particular book then?
Yeah, somewhat. And then that, and that one was it was different because with Holding Their Place, there were those historic details, that was important to me, to get these things right, and also to give a feel, for the place. For Aspen in Moonlight, it was a little bit different because it's in my time, in my setting and a place that I know. So sometimes it was a kind of, the research was sometimes remembering places, and I think, part of the story, it came out of missing Colorado, missing that place, and so getting to write that story, I got to be there again, and that was nice, that was something that was, really enjoyable about the process of writing it. Yeah. So sometimes research was, imagining the town and the mountain town where it's set is a town called Buckhorn, and it's a fictional town, but it's based on a real place, or it's kind of loosely based, on a place. And so I'd have to think about some things about the logic of the place, like, how long might it take to get from one side of a mountain, to another, those kind of things. Mm-hmm. Or I'd think about some places that, that I've been to, or even some settings. So a good example is, this might be an example of like the most enjoyable part of research is one of the scenes takes place in the Brown Palace Hotel, which is Denver, and there's a date, happening, and the Brown Palace is a place that's really well known. It's an old historic hotel. It's really beautiful, and I know about it. I've only seen it from the street. I've never actually been in it, and I thought, wow, I want to use this hotel as a setting. I need to go there. So, when I was out there, visiting family, and my wife was with me, we basically got to go on a date to the Brown Palace Hotel. Aww. And it was great. We got to walk around and look around inside and, spend time in the bar and, kind of just, immerse, in the setting of the place. And that is, that's definitely the best or the most fun kind of research, that you can do for a book.
That's so cool. Good for you. Yeah, that is fun. That's great.
Yeah.
So, how has, you mentioned that you're an art historian, right? So how has your day job, your full-time career as a professor of art and environmental studies influenced your writing? It sounds like it may have.
Yeah, it definitely informs it. I'm fortunate in that my career as a art historian and an academic is, I do what I love, like I love art, and getting to, talk about it and share it with students. I'm also, I'm primarily an art historian, but I'm also at my university, I'm also a part of the environmental studies faculty council. So some of the things I teach overlap, with them. And I'm an environmentalist. That, nature and the environment's really important to me, both personally, but also connections, with art as well. Yeah. So one of the things you'll notice in my writing is that, art and history and nature, all of those things are always there, and so whether with Holding Their Place, it's historical. There isn't a character who's an artist necessarily, but there is a little art story, kind of embedded, in the story. There's a mention that, relative to art. And, in Aspen and Moonlight, there is an art historian, that is one of the main characters. The other thing too is as an art historian, I have a sense of history, and that's helpful. I'm really good at research, and that's helpful, for any kind of writing, certainly. And that connection of art, nature, and place, I can bring that to my writing. And one of the things about fiction is it's really freeing. And this is kind of maybe not so much, influences my writing, but it's connected to it in the sense that, as a professor, we're called professors because our job is to profess what we know to be true, and so we stick to the facts. Yeah. If you're writing fiction, you can take an idea and run with it. You can maybe base something in a fact, but then it becomes something else, or you can invent something. That's something I can't do when I have my academic hat on, but I can, when I'm writing. So I get to use all of those skills, I guess, my skills, interests, passions, but I get to put them together in a different form.
Oh, that's really nice. That's like the best of both worlds then, really.
It is. Yeah. I feel lucky.
Yeah. So, do you have other published works, outside of your work with Bold Strokes?
In terms of fiction, I don't. Okay. So anything else that's published under my name is academic, oriented, so art or kind of scholarship of teaching, that sort of thing. But those Holding Their Place and Aspen and Moonlight are my so far my two works of fiction.
Okay. So when did you start writing fiction? And how did you decide to submit it for publication?
Yeah, I started seriously about 5 years ago or so. I'd have to look at a calendar. Okay. From that. But I had tried writing fiction off and on, for a long time, and it was just kind of a lot of false starts, and but I started doing it seriously when I was having a conversation with Karen Williams, who's a author. She's published quite a bit, and she's novels, short stories, and essays. She's won awards too. I'm really honored. She's a good friend, and she's also one of my favorite authors. I could say favorite author. And, we were talking, and she was like, I think you'd be a good, fiction writer. You should start with a short story. And so she gave me a lot of feedback, and continues, to do that. And so what I started writing was the beginning of Holding Their Place. And so it started off as a short story, and then it took off. Like I think a lot of authors talk about this is once you get your characters established and it gets rolling, it's like they sort of take over, and and that's what happened. And I ended up with a novella length manuscript. And then I thought about, well, where does it go? And did some, research and looking into the publishing world, because it's, this is a new, world for me. I made a list of, I wanted to stay with publishers who were publishing, lesbian fiction and genre fiction. And, so I just made a list and thought, I'll start at the top of my list and work my way down. And the first, the first publisher rejected it, but it was the nicest rejection for anything that I think I've ever had. They gave me some feedback and really explained that they were more interested in a full length novel. And I submitted it to the next publisher, and that was Bold Strokes Books, and they accepted it and have been really helpful and kind in working with me through the editing and publishing process. So I feel like I landed well, and fairly quickly. Like I didn't necessarily, I thought I might have to keep working down the list.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's fantastic. Only one rejection letter I'm hearing.
Yeah, I had lots of others for different things though. So
oh, that's great. That's great. I'm glad to hear that. So are you working on anything currently?
I am, and I'm so close to finishing it up and getting it turned in. Like so many people of all sorts of different professions, and certainly writers, the pandemic has weighed on all of us in various kinds of ways, or slowed us down. So it's a book that I feel like I'm delayed, from where I wanted to be with it, but it's okay. It's gonna, it's getting there. And so the story is, anyway, it has a title. It's called The Fall Line. It's also a contemporary paranormal romance, and you'd call it a ghost story, but I like to refer to it as really a story with a ghost. Again, I think a pattern for me is not to write a story that's kind of traditional to the genre. And there is a love story between two living women, but there is a ghost who's an important character, and as much as it's a romance between women, it's also a romance of place, and so the two characters are main characters are Maddie, who's an English professor and the director of an artist residency. And you'll notice patterns here.
Yeah.
And the other character is Jordan, who's an artist naturalist, and she's out of state. She's the new artist in the program, and she's in town to see the Cahaba lilies. And the story is set in central Alabama in a small college town, which sounds very familiar to where I live. In some ways, my experience here, it informs it. But I actually imagined, what if one of these old little mining communities, it's really kind of a ghost town now, close to the Cahaba River, became this vibrant college town. So that, that's where my imagination comes into play.
Oh, that's neat.
And but one of the ways, the things to consider about the story is like the place is fictitious, the town, but nature is very real. So the setting is the Cahaba River, which is about 20 miles or so from where I am here. Okay. And one of the special things about the river are the Cahaba lilies, which are in bloom, just starting to bloom this week. And they are a endangered plant lily that grows in the river. It lodges itself in rocks in the river and blooms beautifully. So it's an endangered plant. So my character Jordan is here to witness these endangered plants, which he's going to illustrate. There is a ghost who is a little bit mischievous and also complicates things and sets the drama into play. Is probably the best way of describing it. And I live in a town and work on a campus that is very haunted. We have many ghosts, so there are some ghost stories or from where I live that have kind of rolled into this story as well.
Wow, it sounds like a fun story too.
I hope so. I mean, I think so.
Yeah.
I hope that when it's available that readers will think so too.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah. And do you have like a publishing date for that yet or no?
You know what? Let's see. Well, the manuscript is due in July and the publishing date is in 2023, but off the top of my head, I can't remember which month or time of the year it is. So, but that's kind of roughly where I'm at.
Okay. Well, we will look for that for sure. That's great. And is that with Bold Strokes as well?
It is with Bold Strokes.
Great. Yeah. Fantastic. I have to tell you, I was in Alabama right before the pandemic. That is the last place I visited before the pandemic.
Wow.
Yeah, that was really cool. And I had never been there before. My nephew moved there. He was living down in Citronelle. So
I've never been there, but I have heard of it.
Yeah.
It's pretty far south, I think.
It is. Yeah, it's down by the Gulf Coast, and
they're probably growing satsumas and citrus down there with a name like citronelle. That would be my guess. was.
I'm thinking, yeah, it was, but it was it's a nice area. So,
It is really beautiful. One of the things, and this is the environmentalist in me that comes out, but one of the things about the Cahaba River is it's really beautiful and spectacular. A lot of people don't know a whole lot about it. It's sometimes referred to as the Amazon of North America. And it's one of the most biodiverse places in the United States. And it's always depending on which species you're looking at, it's number one or top four or top five. And it's also one of the ones that's under the most threat. So, part of the story is the river is threatened. And and that's, part of the action adventure, aspect of the story is saving the river, from a bad thing happening. I know I'm a little vague because I don't want to spoil anything.
Absolutely. Nope. I gotcha. No, that sounds great. And I'm going to have to check out the Cahaba River. I wrote that down. So
yeah, if you look it up, you'll find lots of information about it.
Okay. Very cool. So, what so far then, Kelly, has been like the hardest scene for you to write, and what made it so difficult?
Yeah, I think hard scenes, or hardest scene. I can think of, there's one, I'm trying to think which is the hardest, because I think there's emotionally hard and there's logistically hard,
True.
And logistically hard is kind of like the craft of writing. Like you've got a big party scene and lots of people and you're trying to keep your, point of view and, in the right, head of the right, character. And that's where, as a relatively new, writer of fiction, I'm learning that world a little bit. But there's emotionally hard, I think, too. And again, without going into too much detail, because this would give away, a part of the story. I've had at least one, scene where something bad happens, really bad happens to a good person, and that's hard for me. I think I'm the kind of person who is. It's my gentle Ben character that aspect that I refer to is I'm pretty calm and good natured. It takes a lot to make me angry. It takes and so, but writing, you have to go there. Sometimes you have to go to these emotions that are difficult. And I think about this even as an art historian and a professor. Like sometimes, I tell my students, like, art doesn't always make us feel good. Sometimes art feels bad. It takes us to places because it's about the human experience, and we have to kind of process those things. So as a writer, that's hard for me because I have to tap into emotions, whether it's like, anger or loss or some kind of pain that I normally want to keep a little distance from,
Sure.
But to write, you've got to get into that space, So for me, I think that's the hardest scene.
Yeah. And a good author, a good writer will do that, right? Will draw out those emotions from the reader, right? And that's what you want to do. And I imagine that writing that is just as difficult. I as a reader, like I think, I don't like when books cause anxiety, I just don't. And so I try not to write that either, because that produces anxiety. But yeah, I imagine that's tough.
Right. But then at the same time, if you can write, where there's a resolution or it feels resolved, where things are good in the end, that offsets it too. I think, it's one of the reasons why I'm writing romance, because, with romance, from the start, there's going to be a happy ending.
Oh yeah.
There may be some tough things that happen along the way. And one of the things I love about romance right now is it's tackling all the subjects or all the things, it's really broad, in a sense. But it's good. But there is power in a happy ending. I think we need it. We need those stories where, good things happen or a good resolution, to a challenging situation occurs. Yeah. And I think romance can deliver that.
Yeah, I agree. Definitely. It's very versatile.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're writing, right, Does that, do you get energized by that, or do you feel like exhausted?
Both.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, kind of, it sort of depends. I think it depends on where you are and what happens. Sometimes when the writing's good and you just, you're like, yeah, you have this like, burst of creative energy and output, it feels good. But even when it's energizing, it can be kind of exhausting too. It's like it kind of taps your brain power. Or also just sitting, for extended, periods of time. I can be brain tired and body tired
Yeah.
from writing. Sometimes it energizes my mind, but, kind of wears me out physically, or the opposite, happens. So it's, I think both is the best answer to that.
That's a good answer. Yeah.
Depends.
It
Depends.
really is. Yeah. Like I can imagine, right? If you're writing some piece that's very emotional, that might, really like just exhaust you. But, maybe you might feel energized by a new idea, or, I don't know, a shape shifter scene, or,
Yeah, and you get to imagine like running up a mountain or something. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, when you write, do you consider yourself? There's usually, like, I'll say two types, like a plotter, someone who outlines everything and knows exactly where they want to go, or there's the what's called the pantser, who just flies by the seat of their pants. That's where that term comes from, and they just sit down and write and don't have things mapped out as a plotter would. Where do you see yourself in that continuum?
Yeah, I try to be a plotter,
Okay.
but I think I end up a pantser.
Really? Really?
Yeah, because I start with an idea of the characters and setting, and key plot points. I have an idea, sometimes of where it starts and things that happen in the middle and where I want it to go, and I'll start to plot that out essentially, or kind of map that out. But what happens is once I start writing, the characters, there's a moment when you have an idea of who the character is, but then you have to really focus on giving the reader a sense of who that character is, and then at some point there's a shift that happens, and you're like, oh, that character would never say that, or yes, my character would do this, and it's like they become kind of real in your head, and on the page. And then sometimes that takes a story in a direction that you didn't necessarily expect it would go, or you learn something, along the way, so, so I guess where I try to be a plotter, but I'm open to the moment, shifting on me, in that respect. Sometimes, like, I get feedback from, beta reader, and, or they have an idea or something, and that, potentially can, kind of shift things too. So, I think, I'm a little bit envious of those writers who can just map it out and then sit down and write it out.
Yeah, that's pretty
And
amazing.
it is amazing to me. I agree. But I'm not that person. I don't know. Maybe some with more experience, maybe I'll become that person, or
I don't
maybe,
know.
I don't know. Maybe this is just the way I write,
Yeah, I'm thinking it probably is, because, like, as I think about it, it doesn't surprise me because of, right, your history with academia. In academia, you usually are, expected to be pretty precise and have things mapped out. But you are also like an art historian, so in the art world, everything's not mapped out. It's kind of loosey goosey, and flowing, and so that doesn't surprise me that you kind of find yourself doing a little of each.
Yeah. I think you explain, you put that into good context.
So yeah, that's great. So, and I think I agree with you. I think that would be very difficult to have an outline and then feel that you had to really stick with that outline, when your characters, and most authors will tell you that characters talk to them and tell them where they want to go, right? So you want to be open to that, and not be so rigid about it, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
So what do you think is the most difficult part of this whole artistic process of writing?
Mm. Well, gosh, for me, it's time, and the actual writing, some days are harder than others. Some days, ideas are flowing and sometimes it's more challenging.
Mm-hmm.
But regardless, you have to have the time to do that. So, being somebody who's got, a full-time job, and to be able to, and especially too within this pandemic world that we're kind of slowly emerging out of, that made writing really hard, because as we were going into the pandemic, it made teaching incredibly difficult and time consuming and exhausting.
I imagine you had to change everything up.
Yeah, we were totally online, unexpectedly at the end of 2020, and then for an entire academic year, and just everything's been hard,
Yeah.
and I know other people experience it differently, but I think that everything is hard sort of holds true, and so I think I'm probably thinking about that too now, because it's I think that's sort of fueling my thoughts on it. But it is about finding the time, of being able to find that balance of doing things you need to do, and especially if you're working full time, and finding that time, because for me, I need blocks of time. Like sometimes I might have an idea, for a passage or a sequence or something, and I can write it out real quick, or just kind of make notes. But my best runs in writing, getting words on the page, is usually when I've got several hours, to commit. So, sometimes I have that time and sometimes I don't, and so I think time is the challenge.
Yeah, just kind of getting into the flow of it, right?
Yeah,
and getting into your characters' really heads.
Yeah, and sometimes you just need the time to think, to be there. There's an artist that I always think about, named Susan Rothenberg, and she talked about how it was really important to spend time in her studio every day, like even if she wasn't painting, like even if she was sitting in a chair, reading a mystery book, like it was important to be in that space because it's the creative space,
That's right.
Yeah, so I think that that's an important aspect of writing too, to give yourself the brain space or the bandwidth, however you want to think of it, to let all those things percolate.
Yeah, I like that. That's great advice. So you mentioned that Karen Williams was your favorite author.
Yeah.
So do you have some favorite books, and maybe other favorite authors, or no?
Yeah, well, let's see, Karen's written several books and short stories, and it's and with certain authors that I really love, it's always like whatever their most recent book is. Oh yeah, I love that one.
Yeah.
So I think the first book I read by her is Love Spell, and I think a lot of people are who know her work are usually familiar with that. That's a wonder. It's enchanting. It's hard not to be a favorite book, but every book has that she writes has these nuggets in it. I think one of the things I love about her as a author is she's writing romance, but she's also she's kind of tackling big ideas in her stories, and she writes wonderful characters too, and so that's an aspect of her writing that I really respond to. And she loves animals too, so I think there's that connection.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, but other authors that I really if I'm thinking about especially the genre of romance and lesbian romance, authors I like are Jerry Hill. I've read several works by her that I really enjoyed. Paradox Valley, in particular, and it has a paranormal aspect to it. It's also set in Colorado, so there may be that connection there too.
She has a lot of outdoorsy type.
Yeah,
books, right?
so I think there's definitely that connection. Catherine Friend is an author that I've enjoyed quite a bit. Some of her books deal with time travel and pirates, and and maybe things being placed in different times. That has an appeal to me. There's a great pirates made me think of. There's a great pirate story by Colette Moody. It has a great title. It's like The Sublime and Spirited Adventure of the Original Sin or something like that.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
It's a fun book, and I grew up loving like Treasure Island, and stories like that. There was a time when I was a kid that I thought maybe I could be a pirate. I thought that was
Aw.
maybe, so those stories have an appeal. And somebody who's, crossed over more mainstream is Sarah Waters.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think so many people love Sarah Waters too, and she's an author. She I think she writes in the stories of the past. She really gives you a feel for those places and a mood
Yeah.
for that place too.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. Yeah. That's great. All right. So we are just about out of time. So I'm wondering, Kelly, if you have any parting words for our listeners today.
Gosh, yes. Well, I think I huge heartfelt thank you, for being a reader, and so, personally, supporting me, as an author, for people who know my writing and who've enjoyed it, but also for authors in general, readers make authors possible,
Mm-hmm.
and also for people who are, like listening to a podcast like this one, um, you know, it's also a thank you, not just for being a reader, but being, like loving and supporting the authors that you like, but also being open to learning about new authors. I think a great thing about a podcast like this is that you have so many conversations, with so many different authors, and it gives you an idea of like, wow, I kind of like that person. I like what they're saying. I'm going to go check out their books,
Yeah.
So so I guess, yeah, like, thank you for being here. Thank you for reading. Thank you for supporting and thank you for, considering other authors' works.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Kelly, for being with us today. And I'm really looking forward to your book, The Fall Line,
The
right?
fun,
Which is due out in 2023.
it,
And yeah, and I'm going to check out your other works as well. So
thank you.
yeah.
This has been great fun. I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah, me too. So that's all the time we have for today. And I'm Anita Kelly. Thanks for joining Liz Talk About Books. And thanks again to Kelly Wacker. And until next time, may your journey be lighthearted, peace be plenty, and be safe, folks.